Question 1. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Because machine learning predictions are probabilistic, engineers should establish confidence thresholds and conduct rigorous testing before release to reduce the risk of harm. Now I'm going to explain. Because predictions are probabilistic, the model is giving you a likelihood, not a guaranteed truth. Therefore, you need confidence thresholds so the system only takes automated action when it's sufficiently sure. Otherwise, it can pause, ask for human review, or fall back to a safer default. Additionally, rigorous testing is what proves the model behaves safely across edge cases before real users are affected. For example, in a medical triage app, a low-confidence prediction should not auto-route a patient. Instead, it should flag the case for clinician review. Question 2. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. To retrieve only Azure OpenAI connections, call connections.list connection type equals connection type.azure store OpenAI. And to fetch one specific connection by name with its credentials, use connections.get connection name include credentials equals true. Let's unpack why those choices are the right fit. Connection type.azure OpenAI is correct because it applies a server-side filter, so you only receive Azure OpenAI connections instead of a mixed list. Therefore, the response is cleaner and more efficient to work with. Next, get is correct because it retrieves one single connection object by its name, rather than returning multiple results. Additionally, include credential equals true ensures the credentials are included in the returned object, which you need when you want to use that connection immediately for authenticated operations. For example, if your app is about to call an Azure OpenAI deployment, fetching the named connection with credentials included lets the request authenticate right away without extra retrieval steps. Question 3. For each task, drag it to the tool that is the universally correct fit. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Summarize a long article with an LLM tool. Make an external REST API call and return structured data. Python tool. Assemble a complex prompt string to feed downstream. Prompt tool. Let's connect each task to the tool that was built for it. The LLM tool is the right match for summarizing a long article because it is designed to generate natural language outputs like concise summaries from large text inputs. Therefore, it handles summarization directly without extra glue logic. The Python tool fits external REST API calls because it can execute code to call endpoints, parse responses, and return structured results to later steps in the flow. Additionally, the prompt tool is the correct choice for assembling complex prompt strings, since its job is to format and compose prompts cleanly before handing them to another tool. In contrast, Endpoint is a deployment target rather than a flow tool, and Dataset Labeler focuses on labeling workflows, so neither one is the correct universal fit for these tasks. Question 4. For each Azure AI search configuration element in the item list, drag it to the matching definition in the option column. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Service URL of the Azure AI search resource used for retrieval. Parameters.endpoint. Name of the target search index that stores content for grounding. Parameters.indexName. API key-based credential used by the client to call the search endpoint. Parameters.authentication.key. Switch that enables semantic similarity retrieval using embeddings. Parameters.queryType equals vector. Reference to the embedding model deployment used to vectorize query text. Parameters.embeddingdependency.deployment Let's walk through the logic behind each match in a clean, exam-ready way. Parameters.endpoint is the service URL because it tells the client exactly which Azure AI search resource to contact for retrieval. Therefore, every search request needs that endpoint to know where to go. Parameters.indexName matches the target index name because the index is the container that holds the documents or chunks used for grounding. Additionally, parameters.authentication.key is the API key credential because it's what authorizes the client to access the search endpoint securely. Parameters.queryType=vector is the switch for embedding-based retrieval because setting the query type to vector instructs the service to run similarity search rather than plain keyword matching. Finally, parameters.embeddingDependency.deploymentName is the embedding model reference because it points to the specific embedding deployment used to convert the query text into vectors before the vector search runs. Question 5. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. By default, the example issues a keyword query where the user prompt text is matched to indexed text. True, switching to a vector query only requires setting query type vector. An embedding model is optional. False. The code extracts the assistant's text with response.choices0, message.content, and prints it. True. Removing data sources from extra body disables grounding and forces the model to rely on training data alone. True. Here's the reasoning behind each statement, step by step. The first statement is true because the baseline setup performs keyword matching, meaning the user's prompt text is treated like a traditional search query against indexed content. The second statement is false because vector search depends on embeddings, so you still need an embedding model configuration to vectorize the query before similarity retrieval can work. The third statement is true because the response object's first choice contains the assistant message, and accessing response.choices0. Message.content is the standard way to pull out the generated text for display. Finally, the fourth statement is true because removing data sources removes the retrieval and grounding pathway, so the model can no longer pull context from the index and must answer without that external grounding. Question 6. A grocery chain wants to speed up its checkout process by allowing customers to place items directly into a basket without scanning barcodes. The company wants an AI capability that can interpret items visually in real time. Which capability best meets this need? Select one answer. A. Generative AI. B. Computer vision. C. Decision support. D. Natural language processing. Correct answer is B. Computer vision. Let's break it down clearly and choose the best fit. Computer vision is correct because the requirement is real-time visual interpretation of physical items, like recognizing products from a camera feed as they're placed into the basket. Therefore, computer vision is the capability designed to process images and video streams and identify objects automatically. In contrast, generative AI focuses on creating content, decision support focuses on analyzing data to guide choices, and natural language processing focuses on understanding text or speech, so none of those directly solve live visual item recognition at checkout. Question 7. A team is setting up hub-based projects and wants to know which portals they can use for development and collaboration across roles. Which two portals are supported? Select two answers. A. Azure AI Foundry Portal. B. Azure Machine Learning Portal. C. Microsoft Sentinel. D. Power Apps. Correct answers are A. Azure AI Foundry Portal and B. Azure Machine Learning Portal. Let's connect the requirement to the platforms that actually support hub-based work. Azure AI Foundry Portal is supported because hub resources can be used directly in the Foundry user interface for AI project development and collaboration. Additionally, Azure Machine Learning Portal is also supported because the same hub resources can be accessed there, which makes it easier for data science and machine learning roles to work in the same environment. In contrast, Microsoft Sentinel is a security operations platform, and Power Apps is a low-code app builder, so neither one is intended for hub-based AI project development workflows. Question 8. What additional benefit do runtimes explicitly provide besides supplying compute and an environment? Select one answer. A. They validate flows in a controlled setting to ensure things work as intended. B. They eliminate the need for connections to external services. C. They guarantee zero cost for all executions. D. They automatically upgrade packages to the latest versions. Correct answer is A. They validate flows in a controlled setting to ensure things work as intended. Let's pin down what runtime adds beyond just CPU and an environment. Runtimes provide a dependable execution and validation context, meaning you can run your flow in a controlled setting and confirm each step behaves as expected before relying on it in production. Therefore, the key extra benefit is validation and reliability, not removing integrations, eliminating costs, or auto-upgrading dependencies. Question 9. Arrange the post-submission portal lifecycle steps that are universally fixed before any evaluation path. Instruction. Drag and drop the items into the correct order, starting with the first step at the top. Submit the fine-tuning job. Monitor the job status while it's running. Job completes. Review the job's input parameters. Let's walk through why this sequence is fixed in the portal workflow. First, you submit the fine-tuning job because that action starts the training process in the service. Next, you monitor the job status while it's running so you can track progress and catch failures or delays early. Then the job completes, which is the required milestone before any post-run inspection or follow-on actions make sense. Finally, you review the job's input parameters to confirm exactly what configuration produced the resulting fine-tuned artifact, which is essential before branching into evaluation or deployment testing paths. Question 10. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Red team testing can reveal previously unidentified harms. True. Prioritization should consider both intended use and potential misuse. True. The mapping stage ends after identification. Testing belongs only to later phases. False. Documented red team successes should be recorded and reviewed. True. Let's make the logic behind each one feel straightforward and memorable. The first statement is true because red teaming is specifically designed to probe for failures and edge cases you didn't anticipate, so it often surfaces new harms beyond the original list. The second statement is true because prioritization isn't just about what you expect users to do. It also weighs how the system could be misused and where the highest risk really sits. The third statement is false because testing and verification are part of mapping, meaning you don't stop at identification, you actively validate what's real and measurable during that stage. Finally, the fourth statement is true because recording successful red team probes creates evidence you can analyze, helps estimate real-world likelihood, and guides the mitigations you choose next. Question 11. Which statement best describes a node? Select one answer. A. A deployment target that triggers the flow. B. An offline batch job separate from the flow graph. C. A tool instance within a flow that performs a specific operation and has defined inputs-outputs. D. A data source that can only accept strings. Correct answer is C. A tool instance within a flow that performs a specific operation and has defined inputs-outputs. Let's clarify what a node really represents inside a flow. A node is the concrete step in the flow graph where a specific tool runs, takes inputs, and produces outputs that can be passed to other nodes. Therefore, it's not an endpoint that triggers execution, and it's not something separate from the graph like an offline batch job. It's also not limited to string-only inputs, because nodes can accept and emit different data types depending on how the tool is defined. Question 12. You're building a flow that queries a public API for facts, then asks an LLM to write a concise, well-structured summary using those facts. Which two design choices align with PromptFlow's model? Select two answers. A. Skip defining the Python node's outputs to keep the graph simple. B. Use a Python tool node to call the API and output parsed data for downstream use. C. Feed the Python node's output into an LLM tool node that writes the summary. D. Put both steps into a single giant LLM prompt so there's only one node. Correct answers are B. Use a Python tool node to call the API and output parse data for downstream use. And C. Feed the Python node's output into an LLM tool node that writes the summary. Let's align the design with how prompt flow is meant to be composed. Using a Python tool node for the API call is correct, because Python can execute the request, parse the response, and return clean, structured outputs that other nodes can consume. Then, feeding that output into an LLM node is correct, because it keeps the flow modular, where each node has a clear responsibility and data is wired step by step through defined inputs and outputs. In contrast, skipping Python outputs breaks the wiring model, and forcing everything into one oversized LLM prompt reduces modularity, reuse, and maintainability. Question 13. You need a starting point for building a RAG-enabled chat experience in Azure AI Foundry without designing a flow from scratch. Which built-in resource should you clone and customize? Select one answer. A. Multi-round Q&A on your data sample. B. Data preparation notebook. C. Text analytics sentiment analysis template. D. Vector index creation wizard. Correct answer is A. Multi-round Q&A on your data sample. Let's connect the goal to the resource that already matches it out of the box. Multi-round Q&A on your data sample is the best starting point because it's pre-configured chat flow designed for retrieval-augmented generation, combining a language model with index lookup for multi-turn question answering. Therefore, cloning it gives you a working RAG chat baseline that you can customize instead of building the entire flow from zero. In contrast, a data preparation notebook focuses on transforming data, a sentiment analysis template targets classification, and a vector index creation wizard builds indexes rather than a conversational RAG flow. Question 14. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. An expenses agent can answer employee questions by combining a generative AI model with corporate expense policy documentation to ensure that responses are accurate and policy compliant. Let's connect the pieces the way a real expenses assistant would work in production. A generative AI model is what produces the natural language answer to the employee's question. However, the policy documentation is the authoritative source of truth for what's allowed, limits, and eligibility rules. Therefore, combining the model with the corporate expense policy documentation grounds the response in official guidance, so the agent doesn't improvise and stays compliant. For example, if an employee asks whether meals are reimbursable on a day trip, the agent should generate the reply while citing the exact policy rule that defines when meals qualify and what the spending cap is. Question 15. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. The agent can be equipped with built-in tools for knowledge gathering and code generation. True. Custom tools can connect the agent to external systems like CRM or inventory platforms. True. Using custom tools is primarily about changing pricing tiers rather than functionality. False. A healthcare scheduling tool can let an agent suggest available slots and send reminders. True. Let's make the intent behind each statement crystal clear. The first statement is true because agents can include built-in capabilities that immediately help with tasks like gathering information and generating code when needed. The second statement is true because custom tools are exactly how you integrate real business systems, like pulling customer data from a CRM or checking stock in an inventory platform. The third statement is false because the purpose of custom tools is added functionality and automation, not pricing tier changes. Finally, the fourth statement is true because a scheduling tool can enable the agent to surface appointment availability and trigger reminders, improving the end-to-end patient experience. Question 16. For each custom tool option, drag it to the correct description in the table. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Describe callable functions to the agent so it can choose and return functions with arguments at runtime. Function calling. Create intelligent, event-driven applications using triggers and bindings for external inputs-outputs. Azure Functions. Integrate with external HTTP APIs by supplying an Open API 3.0 specification for standardized connectivity. Open API specification tools. Build low-code, no-code workflows to connect apps, data, and services. Azure Logic Apps. Let's tie each description to the tool type it naturally represents. Function calling fits the first description because you expose function schemas to the agent, and the agent decides which function to invoke and produces the arguments at runtime. Azure Functions matches the event-driven description because it runs code based on triggers and can use bindings to connect to external systems and data sources. OpenAPI specification tools match the API integration description because an OpenAPI 3.0 spec standardizes how the agent connects to HTTP endpoints, including operations, parameters, and payload shapes. Finally, Azure Logic Apps is the low-code workflow option because it provides a visual designer to orchestrate integrations across apps, data, and services without writing much code. Question 17. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. The Microsoft Agent Framework offers flexibility and scalability for developers, while the Azure AI Foundry Agent Service provides enterprise-grade managed infrastructure, enabling agents to scale securely without manual resource management. Let's translate that sentence into what it means in real implementation terms. The Microsoft Agent Framework is about flexibility and scalability because it gives developers an architectural approach that can support different agent designs and even multiple providers under one consistent pattern. Meanwhile, Azure AI Foundry Agent Service is described as enterprise-grade managed infrastructure because it takes care of the operational layer, like managing compute and storage for you. Therefore, agents can scale securely without manual resource management, meaning you don't have to hand-tune capacity or maintain scaling scripts, and you still keep reliability and compliance as usage grows. Question 18. For each statement below, indicate whether it is true or false. An agent card includes version information to identify the current release of the agent. True. The version field in an agent card determines the authentication level of the agent. False. Version information helps other agents ensure compatibility when communicating. True. The version field is optional and unrelated to the agent's identity. False. Let's pin down exactly what the version field is for and what it is not for. The first statement is true because the agent card's version identifies which release of the agent is being described. The second statement is false because versioning does not control authentication. Authentication is handled through dedicated authentication-related fields and mechanisms. The third statement is true because version information supports compatibility checks, so agents or clients can handle differences between releases when they interact. Finally, the fourth statement is false because version is a key part of the agent's identity for identification and compatibility, so it's directly related rather than optional or irrelevant. Question 19. For each statement, indicate whether true or false. Previous agent-like solutions required hundreds of lines of code for grounding and functions. True. Foundry Agent Service allows client-side function calling with just a few lines of code. True. If integrating with Microsoft 365, semantic kernel is the recommended solution. False. Agents can only use tools defined at creation and cannot call them dynamically. False. Let's avoid the common mix-ups and make each statement precise. The first statement is true because earlier agent-style implementations typically required a lot of custom wiring for grounding and tool invocation, which often meant significant code. The second statement is true because Foundry Agent Service reduces that setup by providing simpler patterns for client-side function calling. The third statement is false, because for Microsoft 365 integration, the recommended approach is a Copilot Studio Agent Builder path, while Semantic Kernel is positioned more for orchestration patterns rather than being the default recommendation for Microsoft 365 integration. Finally, the fourth statement is false, because agents can select and call tools dynamically based on the conversation context, rather than being locked into a fixed, non-dynamic set of calls. Question 20. A platform team wants a single Azure AI agent to access two managed compute plugin, MCP servers, one for product data and another for payments. The solution must pass OAuth headers for each run, restrict the payment server to a short allow list of tools, and require human approval for any payment-related call. Which approach best meets these requirements? Select one answer. A. Configure a shared MCP client session and reuse the same headers across both servers for simplicity. B. Register both servers as separate tools under one toolset and manage approvals directly in the agent run configuration. C. Combine all endpoints into one MCP server and rely on prompt instructions for approval behavior. D. Connect only to the product server, then include the payments endpoint manually in the prompt. Correct answer is B. Register both servers as separate tools under one toolset and manage approvals directly in the agent run configuration. This is the cleanest way to satisfy all three constraints at once. Registering both servers as separate tools under one toolset lets you keep a single agent entry point while still applying distinct controls per server. Therefore, you can pass OAuth headers per run without forcing shared headers across servers. Additionally, you can restrict the payment server using a tight allow list of only the permitted tools, which reduces risk by design. Finally, human approval can be enforced in the agent run configuration for any payment-related tool call, which is a reliable control compared to trying to enforce approvals through prompt instructions. Question 21. Arrange the steps to automatically invoke tools from a remote MCP server using the Azure MCP tool. Instruction: drag and drop the items into the correct order, starting with the first step at the top. Create an MCP tool with the server's label and URL. Update headers to apply required headers for the run. Set approval mode to choose always or never. Create a tool set and add the MCP tool. Start an agent run and specify the toolset property. If requires action, review details and approve using the call ID. Read the final response with tool results in the output. Let's walk through the flow as it would happen when you wire this up end to end. You begin by creating an MCP tool with the server's label and URL so the agent knows which remote MCP server it can reach. Next, you call update headers to attach the required headers for that run, which is where per run OAuth or other auth material gets applied. After that, you set approval mode to define whether tool calls are auto-approved or require review, which establishes your control posture before execution. Then, you create a tool set and add the MCP tool so the agent has an organized collection of available tools. Once the toolset is ready, you start an agent run and specify the toolset property so the run is aware of the remote tools it can invoke. If the run returns requires action, you review the pending tool call and approve it using the call ID to allow execution to proceed. Finally, you read the final response, which includes the tool execution results embedded in the output. Question 22. An orchestration system manages several specialized agents for translation, summarization, and data validation. The manager must decide which agent to trigger next while the task is in progress. What should that decision be based on? Select one answer. A. Current context, task progress, and each agent's capabilities. B. The manager's initial static schedule. C. The alphabetical order of agent names. D. Random selection to ensure variety. Correct answer is A. Current context, task progress, and each agent's capabilities. This decision has to be adaptive, not pre-baked. The manager should look at the current context and task progress to understand what's needed next, and then choose the agent whose capabilities best match that next step. Therefore, the system stays efficient and logical as conditions change during execution. In contrast, a static schedule can't react to new information. Alphabetical order has nothing to do with usefulness, and random selection undermines goal-driven coordination. Question 23. A developer is building an AI system where an agent must receive a user request, process it using its internal logic, and return results, while also handling possible cancellations. Which component ensures all these processes work together in a standardized and coordinated way? Select one answer. A. Event queue. B. Agent executor. C. Request context. D. Routing agent. Correct answer is B. Agent executor. Here's why that component is the coordinator in this design. The agent executor is responsible for orchestrating the full life cycle of an agent run, meaning it ties together request intake, execution of the agent's logic, and delivery of the final results. Therefore, it's also the right place to handle standardized behaviors like task cancellation because it sits at the control point for starting, monitoring, and stopping execution. In contrast, an event queue is mainly about passing events or results. Request context is the container for request details, and a routing agent focuses on directing messages between agents rather than coordinating the execution lifecycle itself. Question 24. What is the difference between automatic and explicit thread management in an Azure AI Foundry agent? Select one answer. A. Automatic thread creation and explicit thread management perform identical functions. B. Automatic thread creation is used for simple interactions, while explicit thread management is used for ongoing conversations requiring maintained context. C. Explicit thread management automatically generates threads for each interaction. D. Automatic thread creation is required for every enterprise-grade scenario. Correct answer is B. Automatic thread creation is used for simple interactions, while explicit thread management is used for ongoing conversations requiring maintained context. This distinction is really about how conversation state is handled over time. Automatic thread creation is ideal when you want quick, single exchanges without manually managing a conversation history. Therefore, it keeps simple interactions lightweight. In contrast, explicit thread management is what you use when you need persistent context across multiple turns, because you deliberately create and reuse the same thread so the agent can maintain the ongoing conversation state consistently. Question 25. Which feature of the Azure AI Agent Client ensures secure enterprise-level connectivity to Azure AI Foundry services? Select one answer. A. Support for Azure CLI, Service Principal, and other Azure Identity Authentication methods. B. Local token generation without Azure Identity Validation. C. Manual encryption of API keys in client-side code. D. Temporary guest account authentication for testing. Correct answer is A. Support for Azure CLI, Service Principal, and other Azure Identity Authentication methods. This is what makes the client enterprise-ready from a security standpoint. Azure identity-based authentication methods, like Azure CLI and Service Principals, plug directly into Azure's security model, including managed identities, role-based access control, and centralized credential handling. Therefore, the client can authenticate in a standardized, auditable way without relying on ad hoc tokens, guest access patterns, or manually managed key encryption schemes in application code. Question 26. Which statement describes a key requirement when running agents concurrently? Select one answer. A. Agents must know which other agents are available to participate in tasks. B. Agents must share intermediate outputs with all other agents. C. Agents are required to run in a fixed sequential order. D. Agents can only work if they depend on each other's context. Correct answer is A. Agents must know which other agents are available to participate in tasks. Concurrency depends on coordination, not forced dependency. When multiple agents run concurrently, each agent can execute independently, but the system still needs awareness of what other agents are registered and available so it can assign tasks and coordinate work correctly. Therefore, knowing which agents are available is the key requirement, while mandatory output sharing, fixed sequencing, or context dependence would either be unnecessary or directly conflict with concurrent orchestration. Question 27. Why must an agent card accurately describe an agent's capabilities, endpoints, and authentication requirements? Select one answer. A. To ensure other agents and clients can interact with it correctly. B. To reduce the number of skills the agent can perform. C. To make the agent inaccessible to unauthorized users. D. To allow agents to communicate only through manual updates. Correct answer is A. To ensure other agents and clients can interact with it correctly. This is about reliable discovery and correct integration. An agent card is the contract other agents and clients rely on to discover what the agent can do, how to reach it, and what authentication is required. Therefore, accuracy ensures requests are routed properly, the right capabilities are invoked, and connections succeed without guesswork or trial and error. The other options confuse documentation with access control or manual coordination, which are handled by authentication mechanisms and orchestration, not by making the card restrictive or inaccurate. Question 28. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Custom named entity recognition uses labeled data to train models that extract specific entities, such as involved parties from documents like contracts. Let's make sure the two blanks line up with how custom NER is actually built and used. Custom NER relies on labeled data because the model needs annotated examples that show exactly what text spans count as the entities you care about. Therefore, labeling teaches the system what to detect and where the boundaries of each entity are in real documents. It extracts specific entities because you define the entity types up front, like vendor, client, or contract party. And the model is trained to find only those categories rather than general topics or sentiment. For example, in a contract workflow, custom NER can pull out the involved parties consistently so they can be routed into review, compliance checks, or downstream record systems. Question 29. For each statement below, indicate whether it is true or false. Ambiguous or overlapping entities in labeled data can reduce model accuracy. True. Creating distinct entities like phone, email, and social media helps improve recognition accuracy. True. Using fake or synthetic data always improves model performance. False. A well-distributed dataset ensures the model learns real-world patterns. True. Let's ground these answers in what actually happens during training. The first statement is true, because ambiguous labels and overlapping entity spans confuse the model about what to extract, which typically lowers extraction accuracy. The second statement is true because clearly separated entity definitions reduce confusion between similar categories, so the model can learn cleaner boundaries between phone, email, and social media values. The third statement is false because synthetic data can help in some cases, but it can also distort real input patterns and reduce accuracy, so it does not always improve performance. Finally, the fourth statement is true because a well-distributed dataset exposes the model to the variety it will see in production, helping it generalize to real-world patterns instead of overfitting to a narrow subset. Question 30. For each translate API parameter, drag it to the correct description. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Specifies whether to include character position mapping between source and translated text. Include alignment. Includes information about the number of characters in source and translated sentences. Includes sentence length. Defines how profanities are handled during translation. Profanity action. Specifies how marked profanities appear in the translation output. Profanity marker. Let's connect each parameter to the exact behavior it controls in the translation response. Include alignment is the correct match for character position mapping because it adds alignment data that maps ranges in the source text to corresponding ranges in the translated text. Therefore, it's useful when you need to highlight or track where translated content came from. Include sentence length matches sentence character counts because it returns length metadata for both the source and translated sentences, which helps with display and formatting decisions. Profanity action is the control for how profanities are handled because it determines whether profanity is kept, removed, or flagged during translation. Finally, profanity marker is the control for how flagged profanity is represented because it determines the marking style in the output, such as masking with symbols or wrapping in markup. Question 31. For each Azure Speech Translation Resource component, drag it to its correct description in the correct match column. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Identifies the geographical region where the speech service is hosted. Location, used by client applications to authenticate when calling the service. Key, displayed on the Keys and Endpoint page in the Azure portal. Keys and Endpoint page. Required, along with region information for SDKs to access the service. Let's connect each description to what you actually use when configuring speech translation. Location is correct for the hosting region because it tells you where the speech resource is deployed, which the SDK needs to route requests correctly. Key is correct for authentication because it's the credential the client sends to prove it's allowed to call the service. Keys and Endpoint page is correct for what's displayed in the portal because that page is where you view the key values and endpoint region details needed for configuration. Finally, key appears again for SDK access because the SDK typically requires both the region and the key together to authenticate and successfully connect to the speech resource. Question 32. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. The VoiceLive API uses WebSocket connections for real-time audio communication and JSON-formatted events to manage conversation flow. Let's connect each blank to the exact requirement it satisfies. WebSocket connections are used because real-time voice experiences need continuous, bidirectional, low-latency streaming between the client and the service. Therefore, audio can be sent and responses can be received without the delays you get from request-by-request patterns. JSON-formatted events are used because the conversation is controlled through structured event messages, which cleanly describe what's happening, like audio chunks, intermediate results, and response handling, so the client and server stay synchronized throughout the interaction. Question 33. For each statement below, indicate whether it is true or false. Sentiment analysis quantifies emotional tone as positive, neutral, or negative. True. Sentence-level sentiment can differ from overall document sentiment. True. A document with both positive and negative sentences is labeled mixed. True. If all sentences are neutral, the overall sentiment is positive. False. Let's make the logic consistent with how sentiment results are computed. The first statement is true because sentiment analysis assigns a polarity classification, typically positive, neutral, or negative, based on the emotional tone of the text. The second statement is true because each sentence can carry its own sentiment, and the document-level result is an aggregate that may not match every individual sentence. The third statement is true because when the content contains meaningful positive and negative signals together, the overall label is commonly reported as mixed. Finally, the fourth statement is false because if every sentence is neutral, the overall sentiment stays neutral, not positive. Question 34. A developer wants to automate model building and deployment without using the visual interface. The solution must create the project, import data, train and deploy programmatically while monitoring each asynchronous job. Which option fits this requirement? Select one answer. A. Using the REST API. B. Using Language Studio. C. Using Azure Data Explorer. D. Using Microsoft Entra ID. Correct answer is A. Using the REST API. This requirement is fundamentally about end-to-end automation with job control. The REST API is the best fit because it lets you programmatically perform every lifecycle action, like creating projects, importing datasets, starting training, deploying models, and pulling job status for asynchronous operations. Therefore, you can automate the entire pipeline and monitor each step reliably without relying on a visual tool. In contrast, Language Studio is a UI-driven experience. Azure Data Explorer is built for data querying and analytics rather than model lifecycle management, and Microsoft Entra ID focuses on identity and authentication, not project creation, training, or deployment workflows. Question 35. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Assigning multiple classes to a document is supported in multiple label classification. True. In single label projects, each file can be assigned 0, 1, or many classes during labeling. False. Higher data quality and variation are directly correlated with better model performance. True. A false negative occurs when the model predicts X, but the file is not labeled X. False. Let's make sure the terms match the classification rules and error definitions. The first statement is true because multiple label classification is specifically designed to allow more than one class to be applied to the same document. The second statement is false because single label projects restrict each file to only one class during labeling, not many. The third statement is true because clearer, more representative, and more varied training data generally improves how well the model learns real patterns and generalizes. Finally, the fourth statement is false because predicting X when the file is not labeled X is a false positive, while a false negative is when X should be present, but the model fails to predict it. Question 36. A data labeling specialist is training a model to extract contact information from business forms. They first create a single entity named Contact Info, which mixes phone numbers, emails, and social media handles. Model performance is poor. How should they redesign their entities? Select one answer. A. Remove all examples containing social media handles. B. Merge all contact details into one combined entity labeled User Info. C. Keep the single entity and add more examples of mixed data. D. Create separate entities for phone, email, and social media so each can be recognized individually. Correct answer is D. Create separate entities for phone, email, and social media so each can be recognized individually. Here's the practical reason this fix improves extraction quality. When one entity mixes multiple formats, the model can't learn clear boundaries or consistent patterns because phone numbers, emails, and social handles look and behave differently in text. Therefore, splitting them into distinct entities removes ambiguity and lets the model learn the unique signals for each type, which typically improves both precision and recall. Removing examples would shrink coverage, and adding more mixed examples usually just reinforces the same confusion rather than clarifying what the model should extract. Question 37. Arrange the following steps involved in implementing speech synthesis with the Azure AI Speech SDK in the correct order. Instruction. Drag and drop the items into the correct order, starting with the first step at the top. Create a speech config object with resource key and region. Optionally create an audio config to define audio output. Instantiate a speech synthesizer with speech config and audio config. Invoke speak-text async to synthesize the text input. Process the speech synthesis result object returned by the SDK. Let's walk through the build and run flow the SDK expects. You start by creating the speech config with the resource key and region, so the SDK knows which speech resource to authenticate to and where to send requests. Next, you optionally create an audio config to control where the synthesized audio goes, such as speakers or an output file. Then, you instantiate the speech synthesizer using those configurations, which wires together the service connection and output target. After that, you call speak-text-async to perform the actual text-to-speech conversion. Finally, you process the speech synthesis result to confirm success, handle any errors, and work with the returned audio output details. Question 38. What best describes the relationship between Azure AI Language Question Answering and Q&A Maker? Select one answer. A. They are two unrelated services. B. Question Answering is the older version of Q&A Maker. C. Question Answering is a newer version of Q&A Maker. D. Q&A Maker replaces question answering for all new deployments. Correct answer is C. Question Answering is a newer version of Q&A Maker. Here's the relationship in practical terms. Question Answering in Azure AI Language is the newer, updated implementation that evolved from Q&A Maker and effectively supersedes it for modern solutions. Therefore, they're not unrelated, and the direction of replacement is toward using question answering rather than going back to Q&A Maker for new deployments. Question 39. What is the purpose of the questions field in the JSON response from a knowledge base? Select one answer. A. It lists different user question variations that share the same answer. B. It defines the maximum number of answers to return. C. It records the time of the API request. D. It specifies the metadata filters used in the query. Correct answer is A. It lists different user question variations that share the same answer. Here's what that field is doing inside a knowledge base response. The questions field represents the alternate phrasings or variations that map to the same underlying answer entry. Therefore, it helps the knowledge base recognize multiple ways a user might ask for the same information and still return the correct shared answer. Settings, like how many answers to return or which filters are applied, are controlled in the request, not in this questions list in the response. Question 40. How is each class defined within the classes array of an Azure AI Language classification project? Select one answer. A. By listing only the class name as a plain text string. B. By using an object with a category field containing the class name. C. By assigning a numeric ID without any field name. D. By defining the class inside the metadata section. Correct answer is B. By using an object with a category field containing the class name. Let's confirm the correct choice and also eliminate the distractors cleanly. B is correct because each class is defined as a JSON object with a named field, typically category class name, which makes the schema explicit and consistent for the service to parse. A is incorrect because the class's array is not defined as raw strings. It expects a structured object with a field name rather than plain text values. C is incorrect because classification classes are represented as textual category names, not anonymous numeric IDs with no field to describe what the number means. D is incorrect because metadata describes the project settings, while the actual class definitions belong in the class's array, not inside metadata. Question 41. A model achieves a high recall but low precision score. What does this indicate about its behavior? Select one answer. A. It recognizes most entities correctly but misses a few. B. It labels entities correctly but fails to find many of them. C. It recognizes most entities but often assigns the wrong label. D. It fails to detect most entities and labels. Correct answer is C. It recognizes most entities but often assigns the wrong label. High recall means the model is finding most of the true entities that exist in the data. However, low precision means many of the entities it predicts are incorrect, which typically shows up as false positives or frequent mislabeling. A is incorrect because recognizes most entities correctly but misses a few, describes strong correctness of predictions, which aligns more with high precision and only slightly reduced recall, not low precision. B is incorrect because labels entities correctly but fails to find many, describes low recall since the model is missing many true entities, which contradicts the high recall condition. D is incorrect because failing to detect most entities would imply low recall as well, and if it also fails broadly, precision would not be the main issue. This contradicts the stated high recall. Question 42. An AI development team observes that newer generative AI models can now process multiple types of input data, including audio, making them suitable for advanced virtual assistants. This reflects which current trend in AI model development? Select one answer. A. The elimination of all text-based AI models. B. A shift toward offline-only language models. C. The deprecation of cloud-based AI platforms. D. The increasing availability of multimodal models. Correct answer is D. The increasing availability of multimodal models. This is exactly what multimodal progress looks like in practice. D is correct because multimodal models are designed to accept and reason over multiple input types, such as text, audio, and sometimes images, which directly enables richer assistant experiences. A is incorrect because text-only models are still widely used and remain valuable. Multimodal growth expands capabilities rather than eliminating text-based models. B is incorrect because the trend described is about handling additional modalities, not about pushing models to be offline only. Many multimodal systems still rely on cloud resources due to compute demands. C is incorrect because cloud platforms remain a primary way to deploy and scale these advanced models, so this is not a deprecation trend. Question 43. When sending a batch request for language detection, which two constraints must be respected by every submission? Select two answers. A. Each collection is limited to 1,000 items. B. Each document must be under 5,120 characters. C. Requests must include a country hint for every document. D. Confident. Question 43. When sending a batch request for language detection, which two constraints must be respected by every submission? Select two answers. A. Each collection is limited to 1,000 items. B. Each document must be under 5,120 characters. C. Requests must include a country hint for every document. D. Confidence scores must be exactly 1 for the request to be valid. Correct answers are A. Each collection is limited to 1,000 items. And B. Each document must be under 5,120 characters. These are hard limits that affect whether the request is accepted. A is correct because the batch collection has a maximum number of documents allowed per submission, capped at 1,000 items. B is correct because each individual document has a size limit, and staying under 5,120 characters is required to avoid rejection or truncation issues. C is incorrect because country hint is optional. It can help improve detection in some cases, but it is not required for every document. D is incorrect because confidence scores are produced by the service as an output and can range from 0 to 1. They are not an input requirement and do not need to equal 1 for the request to be valid. Question 44. Which of the following statements best describes when to use the REST API instead of an SDK for the Azure AI language service? Select one answer. A. When you only need to make quick visual edits in Language Studio. B. When you need complete programmatic control over model creation, training, and deployment. C. When you are writing scripts for Azure Resource Manager. D. When you want to monitor resource billing usage. Correct answer is B. When you need complete programmatic control over model creation, training, and deployment. This is the scenario where REST gives you the most control surface. B is correct because REST endpoints expose the full set of operations for creating projects, importing data, starting training jobs, deploying models, and monitoring asynchronous job status, which is exactly what end-to-end automation requires. A is incorrect because visual edits are done in Language Studio's UI, not by choosing REST over an SDK. C is incorrect because Azure Resource Manager is for provisioning and managing Azure resources, not for operating the language model lifecycle through the language service APIs. D is incorrect because billing and usage monitoring is handled through Azure Cost Management or billing tools, not via the Azure AI Language Service REST API for modeling operations. Question 45. Which task kind value is required in the JSON payload when performing a custom entity extraction task? Select one answer. A. Custom single label classification. B. Custom entity recognition. C. Custom multi-label classification. D. Entity linking. Correct answer is B. Custom entity recognition. B is correct because custom entity recognition is the task kind that represents custom named entity recognition extraction, so it tells the service to run a custom entity extraction operation. A is incorrect because custom single label classification is for assigning one category label to a document, not extracting entity spans. C is incorrect because custom multi-label classification is also a classification task used when a document can have multiple labels, not for entity extraction. D is incorrect because entity linking focuses on linking mentions to entries in a knowledge base, rather than extracting custom entity types from your labeled training schema. Question 46. For each Azure AI service, drag it to the box describing its function. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all, used to read and extract text from images or scanned documents. Azure AI Vision, designed to extract structured data such as key-value pairs and tables. Azure AI Document Intelligence, capable of analyzing documents, audio, and video in a multimodal way. Azure AI Content Understanding. Let's confirm why each match fits and why the unused options do not. Azure AI Vision is correct for reading and extracting text because it provides OCR and image analysis to pull text from photos and scanned documents. Azure AI Document Intelligence is correct for structured extraction because it specializes in form and document processing, returning fields, key-value pairs, and tables. Azure AI Content Understanding is correct for multimodal analysis because it can work across inputs like documents, audio, and video to extract and classify information. Azure AI Search is incorrect here because it is primarily for indexing and querying content, not extracting text from images or parsing document structure by itself. Azure AI Translator is incorrect here because it translates text between languages, but it does not perform OCR, structured form extraction, or multimodal media analysis as described in the options. Question 47. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Temporary face IDs can be used for up to 24 hours for verification or similarity checks. Training a person group creates persisted faces that do not expire. Face verification requires storing the person's name and identity. False. A trained facial recognition model is stored in the same Azure resource as the Face API. True. Temporary Face IDs are valid for a limited window, so 24 hours is the key constraint for reusing them in follow-up verification or similarity operations. Training a person group produces persisted face entries that remain available until you delete them, rather than expiring automatically. Face verification does not require storing a person's name because it can operate by comparing face features instead of relying on personally identifying information. Finally, the trained model artifacts are associated with the same face resource that you use to call the API, so applications access that trained state through that resource. Question 48. A company launches a face-based check-in kiosk. Before capturing images, the kiosk shows a notice explaining what is collected, why it's needed, and which teams can access it. Which response practice is being applied? Select one answer. A. Data privacy and security. B. Fairness and inclusiveness. C. Data monetization. D. Transparency. Correct answer is D. Transparency. D is correct, because the kiosk is clearly disclosing what data is collected, the purpose for collection, and who can access it, which is the core of transparency in responsible AI and data practices. A is incorrect because privacy and security are about protection controls, like access enforcement, encryption, retention, and safeguarding data, while this scenario is primarily about informing users up front. B is incorrect because fairness and inclusiveness focus on reducing bias and ensuring equitable performance across different groups, which is not what the notice is addressing. C is incorrect because data monetization refers to using data for revenue or commercial gain, and nothing in the scenario involves selling or monetizing the captured data. Question 49. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. A bounding box is defined as left 0.1, top 0.5, width 0.5, height 0.25. These values are fractions of the image size. The left edge of the box is 1/10 of the image width. From the left edge, the top edge is half of the image height. From the top, the box spans half of the image width, horizontally, and 1/4 of the image height, vertically. These coordinates are normalized, so each value represents a proportion of the full image dimension, rather than pixels. 1/10 of the image width is correct for left 0.1, because 0.1 means 10% of the image width from the left boundary. Half of the image height is correct for top 0.5, because 0.5 places the top edge halfway down the image from the top. Half of the image width is correct for width 0.5 because the box extends across 50% of the image width. 1/4 of the image height is correct for height 0.25 because the box's height covers 25% of the image height. 10 pixels is incorrect because these values are normalized fractions between 0 and 1, not raw pixel counts. Half a pixel is incorrect because fractions describe proportions of the image size, not subpixel distances. From the right edge is incorrect because the coordinate origin is top left, and left is measured from the left edge, not the right. Normalized to 255 is incorrect because 0 to 1 normalization here refers to geometric position and size, not 8-bit intensity scaling. Question 50. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Vision-enabled generative AI solutions can respond to prompts that include a mix of text and image, data. Text is correct because natural language instructions are a primary input modality for generative AI systems, providing the question, task, or constraints the model must follow. Image is correct because vision-enabled models can also take pixel data as input, allowing them to interpret visual content and incorporate it into their reasoning and responses. Numbers is incorrect because numbers can appear inside text prompts, but they are not a separate input modality in the way images are. Schemas is incorrect because a schema is a structured specification or format, not a sensory modality that the model sees, like an image. Binaries is incorrect because binary is an encoding representation, not a semantic modality. The model uses directly for understanding like text or images. Question 51. Which statement accurately describes how face detection and recognition models differ in Azure AI Vision Face API? Select one answer. A. Detection models locate and analyze faces. Recognition models identify known individuals. B. Detection models identify people by name. Recognition models only find bounding boxes. C. Both models serve the same purpose and are interchangeable. Recognition models analyze facial features like blur, noise, and occlusion levels. Correct answer is A. Detection models locate and analyze faces. Recognition models identify known individuals. A is correct because detection is responsible for finding faces in an image and extracting measurable face attributes or geometry, while recognition is responsible for matching a detected face to a trained identity set when identification is required. B is incorrect because detection does not identify people by name, and recognition is not limited to bounding boxes. Bounding boxes come from detection, while recognition focuses on matching identities. C is incorrect because detection and recognition are different stages with different outputs, so they are not interchangeable. D is incorrect because blur, noise, and occlusion are quality or attribute signals that detection can report, but they are not the defining purpose of recognition, which is matching identities rather than evaluating image quality. Question 52. A retail analytics team uses the Face API to process images of crowds in stores. They want to capture head pose and accessories data for every detected face. What does the service return when multiple faces appear in a single image? Select one answer. A. A single combined set of facial attributes for the entire image. B. An array containing one entry per detected face, each with its own attributes. C. Only the attributes for the largest face in the image. D. A numeric count of faces without any attribute details. Correct answer is B. An array containing one entry per detected face, each with its own attributes. B is correct because when the Face API detects multiple faces, it returns a list or array of face objects, and each object includes that face's rectangle plus any requested attributes like head pose and accessories. A is incorrect because attributes are not aggregated into one image-level result. They are returned per face, so each person's measurements stay distinct. C is incorrect because the service does not limit output to the largest face. It processes all detectable faces in the image and returns attributes for each. D is incorrect because the response is not just a count. You receive detailed per-face objects, and a count can be derived from the length of the returned array. Question 53. Your team wants to embed interactive video insights, transcript navigation, topics, labels into an internal dashboard as quickly as possible with minimal custom code, while retaining the option to switch to code-heavy integration later if needed. What should you use first? Select one answer. A. Direct REST APIs only. B. Client libraries only. C. Built-in widgets for quick embedding. D. A custom media player with manual JSON parsing. Correct answer is C. Built-in widgets for quick embedding. C is correct because widgets are designed for fast, low-code embedding of interactive video insights, letting you deliver value quickly while still keeping the door open to move to REST APIs or deeper integrations later. A is incorrect because direct REST APIs require more custom development up front, which conflicts with the as quickly as possible with minimal custom code requirement. B is incorrect because client libraries are still a code-first approach and do not provide the fastest low-code embedding experience compared to ready-made widgets. D is incorrect because building a custom player and manually parsing JSON is the most code-heavy option and is the opposite of the stated goal of minimal custom code. Question 54. In the Azure Video Indexer REST example below, how is the access token supplied to API calls? Select one answer. Example URL, hapivideoindexer.ai/location accounts account ID videos, access token. A, as an HTTP cookie named ViToken. B, as a multi-part form field in the request body. C, as a path segment replacing account ID. D, as a query parameter appended to the URL. Correct answer is D. As a query parameter appended to the URL. D is correct because the example places the token after the question mark in the URL, which indicates it is passed in the query string. A is incorrect because the example does not show any cookie usage, and the token is clearly included in the URL instead. B is incorrect because a multi-part form field would be part of the request body, but the token appears in the URL, not in body form data. C is incorrect because account ID remains part of the path, while the access token is added after the question mark, so it is not replacing any path segment. Question 55. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. The service is designed as a multimodal, generative AI capability that can analyze documents, images, audio, and video through solutions built in the Azure AI Foundry portal, or by calling the Content Understanding REST API. Multimodal is correct because the service supports multiple content types rather than a single input format. Documents, images, audio, and video is correct because those are the supported modalities the service can analyze. Azure AI Foundry Portal is correct because it provides a supported UI experience to build and manage solutions using the service. Content Understanding REST API is correct because it is the programmatic interface used for automation and application integration. Single modality is incorrect because it contradicts the service's purpose of supporting multiple modalities. Only images is incorrect because it narrows the scope and ignores audio, video, and documents. Resource Group Wizard is incorrect because it is not the interface used to build or manage content. Understanding Solutions. SSH Endpoint is incorrect because SSH access is unrelated to using the service through a portal workflow or REST API calls. Question 56. A support team records customer calls and wants a solution that can automatically summarize voicemails, detect sentiment, and extract action items. They want to get started quickly and connect it to existing systems later. Which option best fits? Select one answer. A. Deploy open-source tools on a virtual machine and configure each step manually. B. Redirect audio traffic to third-party endpoints using custom network rules. C. Use an AI service that supports audio input to handle summarization, sentiment, and key information with integration options available. D. Use a computer vision model to process transcripts created from audio recordings. Correct answer is C. Use an AI service that supports audio input to handle summarization, sentiment, and key information with integration options available. C is correct because it directly meets the requirement for end-to-end audio understanding, summarization, sentiment detection, and action item extraction, and it also supports later integration through APIs or connectors, which aligns with the Start Quickly Now, Integrate Later goal. A is incorrect because building and managing open-source tooling on a VM increases setup time, operational complexity, and maintenance, which conflicts with the requirement to get started quickly. B is incorrect because routing audio to endpoints does not provide the analytics capability itself. It only changes where traffic goes and does not solve summarization, sentiment, or action extraction. D is incorrect because computer vision is intended for visual data, not audio understanding. Relying on transcripts as an intermediate step is unnecessary here, and does not address the need for an audio-first solution. Question 57. A cloud engineer is configuring an Azure AI search indexer to analyze large sets of documents. They want the enrichment process to combine both built-in and custom AI skills in one workflow. What should they define to organize and manage these skills together? Select one answer. A. A skill set. B. A data source. C. An index schema. D. A synonym map. Correct answer is A. A skill set. A is correct because a skill set is the object that groups built-in and custom skills into a single enrichment pipeline that the indexer can execute in a coordinated workflow. B is incorrect because a data source only identifies where the content is stored and retrieved from. It does not organize or run enrichment skills. C is incorrect because an index schema defines the searchable fields and their types in the index, not the enrichment workflow that produces those fields. D is incorrect because a synonym map is used to expand or normalize query terms at search time, and is unrelated to running AI enrichment skills during indexing. Question 58. For each preparation concept, drag the correct item into the correct match column. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Required Azure resource before calling the REST API matches Azure AI Services multi-services resource. Provision in the Azure portal matches Create Azure AI Services resource. Provision by creating a hub that includes the resource by default matches Create Azure AI Foundry Hub. Programmatically retrieve endpoint and key inside a Foundry project matches Use Azure AI Foundry SDK with Microsoft Entra ID. Next, I'll explain how to recognize each match quickly. The REST API prerequisite must be an Azure AI Service resource type, so the multi-services resource is the required starting point. Provisioning in the portal directly corresponds to creating the Azure AI Services resource. Creating a Foundry Hub is the path that can automatically include the needed resource by default. For programmatic retrieval inside a Foundry project, the Foundry SDK with Microsoft Entra ID is the fit, because it uses authenticated access to fetch connection details. The unused options do not fit because a storage account alone does not enable Azure AI REST calls, and a tenant ID in a query string is not a valid substitute for API credentials. Question 59. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. The ID document model supports U.S. driver's licenses and international passports. True. Only the biographical page of a passport is analyzed. Visas and other travel documents aren't supported. True. Because ID data is sensitive, you should obtain permission and comply with applicable data protection laws when storing it. True. Business card analysis focuses on email and website only, and does not extract names or phone numbers. False. With the answers confirmed, let's connect each one to what the service actually does and why it matters. To begin with, the ID document model is designed to handle common government IDs, so U.S. driver's licenses and international passports fall within its supported scope. Additionally, when working with passports, the analysis is limited to the biographical page, which is why visas and other travel documents are treated as out of scope in this context. Consequently, because IDs contain regulated personal information, you should always get proper consent and follow relevant data protection requirements before storing or processing the results, just like you would for any sensitive customer record. Finally, the business card statement is false because business card extraction is not limited to email and website. It also pulls details like names and phone numbers, which is the main reason teams use it for contact capture. Question 60. Which feature of Azure AI Search ensures that large-scale search and knowledge mining applications can operate efficiently across vast data sources? Select one answer. A. Offline processing cluster. B. Manual index partitioning. C. Local caching system. D. Scalable cloud infrastructure. The correct answer is D. Scalable cloud infrastructure. Now let's work through why that is and why the others don't fit. Scalable cloud infrastructure is correct because Azure AI Search runs on cloud architecture that can scale to handle large indexes and many concurrent queries efficiently. In contrast, an offline processing cluster doesn't match because Azure AI Search is designed for online, on-demand search rather than batch-style offline processing. Manual index partitioning is also incorrect because scaling and partition management are handled by the service, not primarily by manual partitioning. Finally, local caching can improve response times in limited scenarios, but it doesn't provide the broad elastic scaling needed for large-scale search across vast data sources.